Hey y'all, come on in. Welcome back. In today's episode, we're gonna continue on with Mr. Calvert's filigree belt. Today, we're going to be focusing on how I use a swivel knife. I use how I like to use it. Get you guys down here a little bit lower where the action is. Again, this is a hobby. If you want to start this or get into it as a hobby, strongly encourage it over. I've joked a few times, I call it yoga for the brain. But for me, I don't have any better way to just get involved in this and could care less what's going on outside. Alright, today we're going to do, yesterday we covered using a craft aid pattern. Very briefly, that's what these are. They're made out of plastic. Smooth on one side, you can feel the texture of the pattern on the other. But we laid it out on the belt yesterday. You can see I had to go back in. These craft aid patterns are they're not perfect by any means. So you're going to have areas that won't make a very good impression, but they'll give you enough there to get started with. But you can see where now I wound up having to let this belt dry out overnight so I could use my pencil. It's easier on a dry piece of leather than it is when the leather's wet. But you can see where I had to go in and with the and get the light down here where we can see it a little bit better. But you can see where I had to go in and I had to touch up a few areas. I just had to go in with the pencil and come around where I've got a clear definition of where the pattern is. So now we're going to demonstrate how I use a swivel knife and emphasize how I use a swivel knife. As I said yesterday in the video, you could put 500 leather crafters in the same room, give them the same pattern, and you're going to have 500 different ways of coming up with the same end result. That's the fun of it, that's the beauty of it. You make it yours, basically just putting your stamp on it. So let me get this thing wet again. I think what I'm going to do, I've got a 42-inch belt here. So to keep the videos hopefully instructional and fun, I try to keep them all about 30 minutes in length, so I don't want to get too crazy with it. But yesterday I went over why I've got two lines here. These are the actual border for the belt. If this was a 1-inch wide belt, this is 1.5 inches. If this was a 1-inch wide belt, these lines right here would be the edge of your belt. But what I've had to do since it's wider than that, I don't know why I picked a pattern that wouldn't go all the way out to where I need the border. But a couple of things. It'll be what's called a filigree. So all of the background around these leaves and acorns are going to be cut out. We're going to put a different colored piece of leather on the back of it. We'll get there. But what I've had to do, I also decided that I'm going to do a highlight lace actual stitching, and I'll utilize this line out here now. When I go to punch those holes in, I'll come in and I'll use my lacing tool, but that line will now become my guide. But in order to put your pattern in, there are two ways of doing it. I showed the different ways yesterday. If I'm using one of those craft aids, you're going to need to get your project wet. Otherwise, the impression is not going to embed in the leather. If you're using the tracing film, you've got a picture of something that you want to transfer onto a piece of leather. Use a tracing film. Now I do it dry. I'll transfer it dry or wet. It'll make the impression either way, but it'll leave the pencil marks. Let's just say any of you that actually remember what carbon paper used to be, or you know of it, then when you come in and you trace your pattern, it's going to leave a carbon line of your pattern. So I hold my project off to the side when I get it wet. Use my spray bottle. I hold it off to the side again so I don't spray everything down on the table. No matter how big your project is, you're going to want to wet the entire piece of leather every time. Otherwise, no matter how sanitized your water is, purified, sanitized, homogenized, whatever you want to call it, it's going to have minerals and things in that water that will leave stains. It'll leave watermarks, as I call them. The best way to actually describe it. But you wet it front and back. Again, don't get it just dripping, soaking wet. You're going to get to wait for it to dry out a little bit. But if you wet the entire project down each time, then you're not going to get those watermarks, because your project dries out evenly each time. And that's a little spray bottle. That's a little spray bottle squeaking that you're hearing. Like I said, don't get it just dripping, soaking wet. You'll learn as you go along. Different thicknesses of leather are going to require more water. You see it's a little different. The whole thing is a little bit darker color now. And now hopefully you can see it. You can see my pattern has become highlighted a little bit more now. So okay, how I use a swivel knife. Again, you just have to, you're very likely not going to use a swivel knife the way I do. It's a feel thing. You just get used to it, how you like to use it. There is no law that says this or that is the correct way to use it. And you see, all of these craft aids, they'll come with a picture on them. Even some instructional ideas. But these are very detailed pictures. They've got the different tool part numbers of the different stamps or tools that were used to make the impression. But you can see on here what I've had to do with the pencil is, since it is smaller than what my belt width is, you can see how these leaves and stuff did not come all the way out here to a border or to the edge. Now if I were not doing a filigree style where I'm going to come in and cut all this background out, then this would be fine. This is great. But since I am doing that, I had to come in with my pencil, and this is where the imagination zone comes in, the artistic. You just take these edges, like on these leaves, I just simply continued the curve of it all the way out to where my new established border is going to be. And that's what you do there. Sometimes you have to. You're going to run into this. Depends on the project. As we go along, the next projects that I have coming up, I'm going to be making some wallets and some different things for actually some fellow YouTubers. And what I'm going to be doing to get my pattern for what I'm going to use for that, I'm going to be using business logos and some different things. So I'm going to go online and I'm going to get a picture of their business logo and put that into a Word document that I can transfer onto a piece of paper, and then that will become my pattern. You can use magazines. As long as it's detailed enough to get a pattern off of it, you're good to go. Okay, I've got just a scrap blank piece of leather here. We'll take some jeweler's rouge. You can also get this at Tandy. But what this does, as I explained yesterday a little bit, you just put a little bit of it on a scrap piece of leather. Doesn't take a whole lot. But in order to help that blade slide through that wet leather, if you were to try to cut this pattern out dry, first off, it's not going to cut as deep as it needs to. And then two, when you soak it up, that leather's going to expand and it's just not going to go good for you. When it's wet, every impression you make into it compresses those internal fibers, and that's what allows it to stay there. And try to get you guys in a little bit closer. That way I can make sure that you're in the shot here. Take your swivel knife. I have 3 of them. I've got different blades. You see this one up here, straight blade. I use that on my borders when I'm making a very long border. It's a whole lot easier for me to do it, or use that straight blade. Now this one, you can see how it's angled. You use just the very tip of it. I use this for a lot really close in, finer cuts. But this back portion of the blade, only this tip of it's going to be doing the cutting. With it on an angle, I don't have to tilt that knife in order to keep the remainder part of that blade out of it. You can hold it straight, comfortable. When you make a curve, as I'll demonstrate, use this bottom part here. Use this finger here to put your pressure on. Different thicknesses are going to require different amounts of pressure. You just have to learn. But you'll come in to coat that blade and you'll hold it flat and very lightly. All you're doing is just bringing it back across that ridge on that leather. It puts a little fine coating on that blade, and then it helps keep the edge on that blade as well. Now, parents and adults that are doing this with kids, I'm going to stress again, these blades are designed and made to cut through leather, and they will. But they'll cut you just as easy. So if you have kids around, I need to re-wet that a little bit more. When you're working with kids, you may need to help them with some of it there to get them started. Once you get it cut out, once you get your design and your pattern cut, and the rest of it's depending on what you're making, there'll be some of it that'll involve some sharp blades. It's just necessary. So just a little safety tip for the adults. I want to try to make these videos. I've been doing this since the 8th grade. I'm 65. My wife and I just retired, so I can spend more time with it again. Now what I do, these pictures are going to be your best friend when you're doing this. These are intended to make this a 3D image. Now this particular picture doesn't have the border on it, like I'm putting in this belt. It won't have it. But if you're putting a border on here, then all of this area here, all of your picture is going to be to the eye. It's going to be, I guess, behind the border, be the best way I know how to put it. So in other words, my border around the outside edge here is going to be, everything inside of it is going to be tooled down in back of the border. So what I'll do, let me get my other blade, a little bit of rouge on it, because I'm going to do the border first. That way I can get my boundaries. And these swivel knives do come in the starter kits. But you can probably see the difference in them. You can graduate over time. This is a pro level knife. It's a whole lot smoother, a whole lot more comfortable, more, what would you say, ergonomic, I guess. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to keep my hands out of the way as much as I can. but still have you in the frame. Let's see if I can zoom you in a little bit here. Okay, that's a little bit better. Like I said, everybody's going to hold them different. You just have to figure out what's yours. And I'm going to come down my border. And I'm going to start making my cut. I'm going to go far enough to do this one leaf. Because I want to demonstrate the beveler. I have to get that light a little bit better where I can see behind it, where that blade's going. But you can see how I'm actually cutting that leather. And you just have to get used to how much pressure you put on these things. Because the thicker pieces of leather are going to require a little bit more. You can even come in. A little bit of help for you there to keep your line straight. That's the beauty of this handmade stuff too. If it came off of a machine, and you're not going to see these different imperfections. Now I'm going to change over to my other blade. And I also explained yesterday in the other video that you do not connect these lines how well you can tell. But you can see right there, tip of my thumb, I did not connect these lines. You don't want to do that. If you did, this first layer of this leather is now cut. If I were to join these two lines right here, then this little corner right here, these fibers are going to want to start curling up backwards. That is not what you want to have. So by not connecting those lines, when I come in to tool it, I'll tool right up to the edge. But it will lay that leather down within itself. I'll still have a very defined edge, but it'll still be attached. We're going to come over here now. We're going to do the other side. When you make these borders, there's no law that says they have to be the same. Now to do the leaf, what I want to show you right here in the picture, in order to continue this pattern all the way out, see if I can keep the glare off of from the light. You can see how this next stem right here appears to be below this leaf. So when I come in and tool it with the beveler, I'm going to have it, I'll demonstrate it, but this leaf is going to look like it's sitting on top of here the way I'm going to do it. But we'll come in, and I'm only going to do this leaf because I want to demonstrate that to you. Hoping to be able to get the beveler out. When you have a little bitty short run, all you got to do is just kind of slice it just a little bit. That's all you need. Now if you're a little bit not sure of how the leaf folds over or how it needs to look, leave your picture laying right there next to you. Now this stem is going to be pronounced, so the valley of this leaf is going to be behind it. So I'll come in and I'll cut it next. Start with your foremost project or your foremost object first. I'm trying to do this where you can see it, not having a whole lot of success. So I'm going to come in. Now you're going to have to recoat that blade periodically. When it's no longer cutting smooth, I'll come out to the tip. Now the stem gets smaller as it gets out there, so I'm not going to. Don't be afraid to move these things around either. If you need to do something like that to get your angle where you can see where that blade is, by all means do it. I need to recoat that blade a little bit. You can feel it when it starts to drag or it tries to pull. And just run it over your ridge a little bit more. Now I've got a little leaf impression here where it curls back over. And then this one here, I'll make a little cut. You want these blades to go through here smooth. And these smaller areas are a lot harder to do. And it's not a very big pattern either, so I recommend you practice on something that's a little bit bigger. But this was next on my order list, so I didn't have a whole lot of choice on what I demonstrated it on. But you just come in and you cut out. But if that blade doesn't go through there smooth enough when you're working in next to another figure or a piece of your project, if that thing slips, then you're going to slice through into your next part. Then we'll come out. That's another fold on the other side, so it'll get cut first. Like I said, use your picture. That's what they're there for. Lift your knife up occasionally to see where it's going. I've got a little bit of corner right here that's going to be background, so I'll cut it. And that's the basic outline of your leaf that you're going to be using the knife for. And let me get the light back up a little bit more. And I just got in the habit of every time I'm not going to be using that knife again for a little bit, I just put the caps back on them and put them back in the rack. That way I'm not going to have any accidents. And you see we're starting to get a little bit light right here again, but that's, I'll wet that just a little bit more. But just about as far as I'm going to go on this video. I don't want them to get too long. But I want to try to give you the basic idea of what I'm going to be doing all the way across 42 inches. Let's see, a beveler. Now I use and these come in all different lengths, widths, shapes, sizes, whatever you want to call them. But I've got it, let's see it here. I've got a smooth beveler. And then I've got one that has a texture on the end of it, a little bit bigger. Like I said, you can get them in all different sizes. All depends on, it just helps you work into tighter areas. But this one I'll use on the border to highlight it. I like the textures, personally. It's just me. I'll have to raise my light up so I don't hit it. It's just my preference. You don't hold them very, very hard. You want them to just kind of bounce a little bit. You want them to bounce too much. They'll bounce into areas where you don't want it to go. But I'm down here to the end of it now. You can see how my border now is starting to become what you may want to refer to as your prominent feature now for this belt. The design's going to be down on the inside of it. So now what I want to do to make the top part of that leaf, since the next portion of it's going to be underneath it, I'm not going to do very far into there because I haven't cut that. I just want to demonstrate a little bit. Let's see, we can move up here to this portion of it. And I've got one, looks like a little spoon. That's what I call it anyway. What I'll do with it now, turn this around where I can get it on the other side away from us, where you can see what it does. And I'll come in with it right there where the tip of that leaf curves. And I'll get an even smaller beveler. Like I said, you can get them in all different sizes. I'll use the smaller ones when I'm working in tight quarters. I like to try to get as much detail as I can. And I'll tap it a little bit to get the initial line. There's going to be a lot of twisting and turning here, but that's part of it. Then I'll come back in on the other side now. And I'll follow that other cut mark. And you hit it just however hard you need to. Now you can do another thing to help you, since I am cutting out all of this background. If you want to tool your background, just so when you go to cut it out, it's an extra step, but just so you don't cut the wrong thing out, you can take a background tool I may go ahead and do that on this one anyway, because these are some small. But there you go. That's pretty much it. Now when I do the stem, I'll come in. It'll be the prominent feature in the middle of this leaf. Based on this picture, you see how that stem is prominent in the middle. So I'll come in on it. I'll just use my big beveler. And I'll tool the valley of that leaf. I'll do it along that edge. What I recommend is what you do is just get you some projects. Just start experimenting with the different tools. See how they do. Learn what they do. But this is another way you can tell that it's handmade. See how my line up here is a little bit crooked? That's okay. This wasn't done on a machine. By the time it all gets said and done, what I'll do with the beveler is when I get into that area, is I'll hold a little bit more pressure on it. I'll straighten it out using the tool. Don't try to go back in with that knife. Otherwise you're going to shave off part of that leather, and you don't want that. That's how I use a swivel knife. and then a little bit of a demonstration on using the beveler. What I'm going to do, since I've got 42 inches of this belt to cut out, I'm not going to even attempt to try to do all of that on camera. I'll once I get it all cut, you have the idea now. Once I get it all cut and ready to tool, I'll probably do the biggest part of the tooling just to get all of everything highlighted. And then I'll show you that. And then when I come back in to put the decorative cuts on it, bigger picture here, you can kind of see the decorative cuts like around the acorn. All of this is done with a swivel knife. I can show you how to do that. But to get this to look like it's a little valley in here, they use what I call a pear shader. It's smooth. There's a small one. I think I've got a bigger one. It's smooth, shape of a pear, kind of rounded. But I'll show you how I come in and I'll create those little valleys in the middle of that leaf. So anyway, I'm going to continue on with this, and when I get all of it cut, then I'll bring you back. I may try to save a little bit of it down at the end so I can demonstrate there's more uses of the tools. But from here on, it's going to be the swivel knife, and my beveler is going to be used until I get all of this picture, all of this pattern highlighted, and get my background separated. So it's going to be just a continuation of this for 42 inches. So I'm going to cut this one off here because I don't want to let them get very long. If you have any questions or anything like that, drop it, send me an email. And I want to try to help whoever wants to attempt this. I'll be more than happy to help you with everything that I know how to do. So anyway, with that, Judy and I like to end each video with don't be mean. Ask yourself before you say or do something to someone else. If you're not willing to treat Jesus that way, then let's not treat each other that way. This is meant to be fun. So with that, until the next time, I will say adios for now.